I'm Mark Weinberg from eBay, and I am here today with Randy Shoup to talk to you about how we are using DevOps at eBay to transform our engineering culture. So first, I thought I would just start out and just talk about what problem we're trying to solve. Well, frankly, eBay is just too slow as a company when it comes to engineering. We lag industry leaders, and that's a problem for us. So why does this matter? Well, engineering velocity, of course, leads to better customer experiences, stronger business results, and more engaged and happier employees. So for example, if you're a developer, you just want to write code. Developers love writing code. You don't want to sit in wait states. If you're a product owner, you want to deliver more features and values for customers. And if you're an executive at the company, you want to stay ahead and, of course, beat the competition. So bottom line for us is, frankly, we just need to move faster. So what's our mission? Well, it's actually to turn this around and turn engineering velocity into a competitive advantage for the company. For us, just getting a little bit faster won't be good enough. There are competitive threats everywhere, from big companies like Amazon and Walmart, also newer companies, startups like Shopify and StockX. So we feel pressure and competitive pressure from multiple angles. And so turning this around and improving our velocity is going to be a huge advantage for us. So how did we get here? So Randy and I spent the first 3 months really surveying the entire state of engineering velocity at eBay. We looked at the whole board. We talked to tons of engineers and engineering leaders across the company. And at a high level, what we found is that we really had systemic challenges that have accumulated over many, many years, ranging from code and architecture. We have tons of tech debt, lots of monolithic code. We have missing tools in infrastructure like a high quality staging environment. We had poor processes, for example, things like PRs with way too many changes in them, long-lived feature branches, slow code review processes, yearly site-wide upgrades only. And then we had major team dependencies, which created the equivalent of distributed monoliths. So as a result, there's really no silver bullet to these issues. It's going to require improvements across all areas and span all disciplines, from engineering, customer support, finance, and even at our executive level. Well, luckily, many of these problems that we've encountered are well known with well-established solution patterns. Many companies share these challenges. Perhaps many of you work for companies that have these challenges. So the benefit is that we all get to learn from each other and share what we've done. And hopefully this talk will help all of you. So I thought we just do a quick intro. As I said, I'm Mark Weinberg. I've been at eBay for 1 year now. I don't write code for a living, but I still consider myself an engineer. And I am co-leading this velocity initiative with Randy Shoup. I am the VP of Core Product Engineering, which means I lead some product teams. Like I lead a team working on eBay stores. I have a small team working on mobile. I have a PMO that drives our planning process, but also I act as the equivalent of the senior technical leader for the core product organization. So that's who I am. I'll turn it over to Randy and let him introduce himself.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I'm Randy Shoup. I'm VP and Chief Architect at eBay, and my teams are responsible for the developer platform, the frameworks, sort of all aspects of the developer experience. We're also responsible for sort of the architecture standards across eBay. I have a stable of what we'll call enabling architects that go in and like embed with individual teams, as we'll talk about later. And then I'm also responsible for the technology-wide program management organization. The great thing about this partnership is Mark is on the product engineering side and I'm sort of on the platform and infrastructure side. So by doing stuff together, we can reframe and reprioritize work on Mark's part of this organization, on my part of the organization. We can connect teams together. We can unblock them when there are bottlenecks or issues. We can encourage people and permit them with a sort of carrot. And then we can also like suggest and mandate with a little bit of a stick. So, we shamelessly leverage all of these capabilities as leaders together. I'm going to talk a little bit about the assessment that Mark mentioned. So again, as Mark mentioned, we did several months doing what the lean manufacturing people would call a value stream map. So we looked end to end at the product life cycle. So you can imagine that I think of it as divided into 4 areas. So like planning, where somebody has an idea and at some point it becomes a project or things people work on. Development, where that project becomes, committed code. Delivery, where that committed code gets deployed to the site, and then an iteration where we, do experimentation and we do analytics and we iterate on the stuff, in real time. We have issues at all of those levels. So from the planning side, we sort of have lots of issues, as Mark mentioned, of coordination between teams, a lot of inter-team dependencies, and basically every team at eBay has too much work in progress. From the development perspective, we talk to the developers and build and testing time is an issue. They want that to be much lower. Every developer feels like a lot of context switching and wait states. We have a pretty coupled architecture that has grown up over the 26 years of eBay's existence as a company. We don't have a strong set of service contracts, and there's a lot of hidden work too that just doesn't bubble up to the higher levels. In terms of software delivery, if I look overall at eBay, not as much use of end-to-end development pipelines or deployment pipelines as we would like. Lots of issues that Mark mentioned in terms of staging, more manual testing than we'd like. When we started this work, no automated rollout of code to the site, no canary deployments, and then a minimal use of feature flags. And then from an iteration perspective, again, if I look across eBay, not as much end-to-end monitoring as we would like of the customer experience, some issues around tracking customer behavior, and what we like to call dysfunctional experimentation, where some teams do almost too much experimentation and are afraid to move forward. And at the same time, some teams don't do any experimentation at all. So lots of opportunities for improvement, as you can imagine. But we wanted to focus, laser focus on the actual bottleneck that is happening at eBay. So we decided to focus on the software delivery and on the software development areas of this. Not that the other ones don't need improvement, but that they're not our priority at the moment. Why did we focus in the software delivery area? It's because improving software delivery makes all the other things possible by enabling us to change more quickly and reducing the cost of that change. So as chief architect, I'd love for us to get to a less coupled architecture, and we are going to do it. But I can't uncouple the architecture if we only deliver software, like once a month or once every couple of weeks. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about how we measured our success, and then we're going to hand it off to Mark to tell about how we did this. So since we're doing software delivery, we took a page out of the Accelerate book that I hope all of you have read and used the 4 Accelerate metrics to chart our progress, right? So those are deployment frequency. How often are we deploying software? Lead time for change. How long does it take a developer from committing her code till it shows up on the site? Time to restore service. So when we have an incident, how quickly can we restore service to customers? And change failure rate. What's the percentage of time when we do a deployment that we have to roll it back or hotfix it? So if we look overall at eBay, we're solidly in the medium performer category. But one of the things that we like about this work is for the teams that we work with on this velocity work, we were able to move all of those teams into the high performer category. So we'll talk more about how we did that and what specifically we did to move the metrics. But it's really exciting that we've been able to move the deployment frequency and lead time metrics, which we've been focusing on, and actually not even intentionally, also improving the time to restore service and the change failure rate. So it really is true that you don't have to choose between speed and stability. So now I'm going to hand it off to Mark to talk about how we did all this.
Great. Thanks a lot, Randy. So the first thing we did is we focused the effort on a select set of what we call pilot domains, their applications, and also a set of platform tracks. We knew we couldn't just go after every single thing, every application or every team that we worked on at eBay. There was still learning for us to figure out what the best way to achieve these wins would be at eBay. And so we started with roughly 10% of eBay's active applications. Those are the ones in the pilot. And then we looked for a balance of short-term wins and long-term capabilities. Obviously, both matter. So like a simple thing like saving 5 minutes on a task for every engineer every day across the entire organization, turns out it is a big win. So we wanted to get lots of those. But then there was also larger changes like bigger code refactoring projects or some re-architecture. These have much bigger impact, but obviously carry more risk. But we did take on a couple of those. Our big focus was driving improvements in developer productivity. So we looked at our build times, our server startup, our PR validation times, things that developers do every single day this, the standard kind of build, test, debug cycle. And we really kind of just dug in there and went after those. And then focused, a huge amount of our effort on software delivery. As Randy mentioned, improvements here make everything faster. So we just really have a ruthless focus on process automation. So getting rid of all of our manual tests wherever we can, automating our load and performance testing, our site speed testing. We have lots of team dependencies, so automating our concept of partner sign-offs, automating our security testing, our localization and accessibility tests. So there's really just a ruthless focus on that automation, which is a huge, huge advantage. And then just as Randy mentioned, faster deployments using canary deployments and traffic mirroring. So those were the primary things that really drove these improvements in delivery. And then we also spent time focusing on our instrumentation and monitoring. We found we were really flying blind in a lot of places. So, alerting, better observability gives us more confidence to deploy faster or roll back faster. eBay, for example, is managing payments now. And so when it comes to managing payments and money, you have to be able to detect and resolve issues quickly. So we couldn't fly blind. And then lastly, this sort of longer term capabilities on the architecture side, we focused on areas with high active development, high customer usage, things like our view item page, which is the single most visited page on the site, and then also our mobile application. And then areas where we had lots of team dependencies or brittle, hard to test code. So I mentioned platform tracks and the pilot domains. This just gives you an example. Like the platform tracks are sort of more horizontal areas, things like I mentioned, build, our CI system, staging, but even things like educating and training our engineers. And then the domains are just sort of more areas of the application. So things like selling, search, and ads. And it was really sort of just this sort of joint effort across the horizontals and verticals that I think have really made these things work well. So let's just talk a little bit about how we work. Obviously, collaboration was a big part of enabling this, and we have separate organizations. My organization, Randy's organization, and in the past, those platform and applications team didn't really work that closely or iteratively. And so we've really brought the teams together, and they work as really one team. And then, as Randy mentioned, we embed senior architects from his team in with the application teams to help, to coach, to advise, even write some code. And that's really worked well. On the communication side, Randy and I meet every single day. I think that's been just instrumental in just making sure we understand what's going on in each other's worlds. We run a weekly scrum of scrums where individuals and teams learn from each other in a single place once a week. And so that's been really effective. And then we also Randy and I do weekly deep dives with the teams where we coach them, we push them, we find additional bottlenecks, and we really just kind of work closely to help them find issues. And then lastly, we do a monthly operating review, which keeps our executive leadership team up to date. And of course, engaged and interested in program, which is important because it's not a short-term program. It's something that needs investment and nurturing for the long term. And so keeping them up to date really helps with that.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'll talk a little bit about the measurement side. So we put together one of the first things that we did was we put together a dashboard that showed those 4 key metrics for every app at eBay, all the several thousand applications. So we can look at any app at any time and see where they are going back a day, a week, a month, a year in terms of their deployment frequency, their lead time, change failure rate, and MTTR. That same team also for each deploy, allowed us to delve in, click through, and just see more granular visibility into all the steps in the delivery pipeline. So that helps us to, again, find bottlenecks and look for opportunities for improvement. And then each of those platform tracks or horizontal tracks that Mark was mentioning also had input metrics that we were driving towards. So, on the build time, for example, we started where some applications would take an hour to build, and now they take 5 minutes. And, so those kinds of input metrics that are upstream from the outcomes of the 4 key accelerate metrics. In terms of iteration, like Mark suggested, our model is basically, hi team, tell us some impediments that you have to going faster. So like we would always ask, hey, what if we asked you to deploy daily or 10 times daily? Tell us all the reasons why that doesn't work. And every team would give us this big long list of 10 or 20 different things. And we'd say, okay, we'll work on this thing, we'll work on that thing. We already have a team working on this, et cetera. And so we always think of what are the opportunities for improvement, look at what are the biggest places where we get the bang for the buck, and then we iterate on those. And within each of those, we do what Deming would call a plan, do, check, act cycle. So we look at an opportunity for improve, we do an experiment, we check to see if that experiment was successful. If it is successful, we double down on it and bring it more widely. If it wasn't successful, great, we try something else. And again, we stop the effort, if we're not getting an improvement. And then the other thing that Mark mentioned earlier, which has been super critical, is training and workshops. So we have a whole, internal training suite of training videos that a bunch of the architects internally are put together, and individual teams talking about how they've made velocity improvements in their areas. And it's a lot of opportunity for sharing, but also a lot of opportunity for learning and dissemination. So in terms of the initiative results, like we're pretty proud of this actually. So we've been at this for this calendar year, so not quite a year, and we have doubled the productivity of those pilot teams that we're working with. So again, as Mark mentioned, it's roughly 10% of the actively developed applications at eBay. And when we say double productivity, what do we mean? We mean that holding the team size constant with the same people and the same environment, they deliver twice the features and bug fixes that they were doing before. And so in terms of the accelerate metrics, we've improved the deployment frequency on average 3x. We've shrunk the lead time 2.5x. And even without focusing directly on it, we've actually improved our change failure rate 3x as well. So I'll hand it off to
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I can't say enough about putting these metrics in place. It really gets rid of these debates about, is this working? Is this working? So it just gives you a tangible way to demonstrate, yes, the program is actually working. So I highly recommend doing something like this. We focused on systematically just removing these bottlenecks, and we just jump from one bottleneck to the next, team to team. And then we also sort of, as we talked about, focused on nuts and bolts, things like build, startup, and PR validation time. We improved our staging environment, so now we have great clean data that's privacy clean. We have last known good components, so people can run tests in staging reliably and trust the results. As I said before, we automated many of our processes. And then we did things like we moved our mobile release cadence from what used to be monthly to weekly, and that's been a huge improvement. It's improved our quality because you don't have people sort of rushing changes because they don't want to miss the train. There's another train, next week now. So that's really helped a lot. It enables us to get faster hot fixes out to customers. It also reduces our batch sizes into something that's smaller, which is definitely something that we want. On the sort of culture side, it's really been fun. Teams don't want to go back to the old way of working. We hear a lot this notion of, hey, it's working. So that's been really fun. And I think lots of teams are trying to get into the pilot, and luckily they'll have an opportunity next year. As I mentioned earlier, it's really a culture of collaboration on this project. It's a no blame culture. We work together to find a problem and fix it. And so I think that's been really sort of healthy for the company.
Cool. So in terms of community and sharing, one of the great, completely unexpected second order effects is it's not just my platform and infrastructure team that's doing the automation, it's the individual teams automating their own processes. So for example, one of the teams built a little PR reminder tool where, hey, this PR has been waiting for 2 days, that make sure that you do your code review. Automation of end-to-end performance testing, which was mostly run manually. Like pressing a button manually. Now that's automated, and lots of effort on improving the accessibility testing, localization testing. So lots of teams across eBay are working on automating their own workflows to make their lives better. As part of that team of teams meeting that Mark mentioned that we do weekly, we also do these regular team demos. So every time a team does some interesting thing, improves build time, or automates one of these processes, we schedule a little demo and we invite everybody, and it's a great sharing mechanism, but also a great encouragement mechanism for teams to do this work. And it's a great mechanism again to share all those things with one another. In terms of executive support and engagement, like this is absolutely critical for a transformation like this. And one of the things that we're very lucky about is our newly, relatively recently come-in CEO, Jamie Iannone, constantly highlights this particular effort at the all hands, at executive meetings. So he keeps talking about how it's the most important initiative at the company. So, no pressure for Mark and Randy, but also there's, he wants us to go faster, which is great. So I love the fact that, our executive team is seeing the value of this work and wanting to invest even more in it going forward. So here, let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges, because, it hasn't all been, roses and unicorns. So one of the things that is a side effect, almost an intentional side effect of the fact that we took this, very cross-sectional approach where like one or two teams in each of these individual areas across the entire area of eBay, is we've been able to improve the outputs for those individual teams. So we've improved those individual teams' productivity, and we see that in the numbers. But because we haven't done end-to-end of any particular flow, we haven't improved overall eBay outcomes. So that's something that we're going to be working on next year as we expand the program. In terms of challenges for the initiative team, well, as with all things, under-resourced platform teams are a bottleneck. And so, that's something that, I'm trying to work on in my area. In Mark's area of the world, making sure that teams, when they commit resources to doing this work, that they actually do it and don't get, distracted by very legitimate requests to do feature work, but improving daily work over doing the daily work. Often, this was an interesting finding. Often we found that in the product teams, these efforts would be led by quality engineering and not development. And there's nothing wrong with the quality engineers; they're great and they live in these pipelines. But one of the things that when we start to shift to changing the development side behavior in terms of trunk-based development or doing PRs. There was a little bit of a mismatch there. And then also overtaxed individual leaders, which is just another way of saying Mark and Randy are pretty busy.
That is true, Randy. We do have some challenges about people focus too much on the metrics. eBay is a very metric focused company, which is mostly very good, but our job is to make our engineering process faster. And so we do have a lot of people that are just hyper focused on the metrics rather than, just actually making ourselves faster. There's definitely a fear of failure. We hear comments like, hey, going too fast caused this bug, or did it cause this bug? But really what we're finding is that actually our quality is going up because we're applying some of these principles. And then just lastly, lack of belief in the program. There's still people that you have to convince. We need to do a bit of evangelism, spend time with folks and really explain, sort of the what and the how and the why of these things. But then once we do, people sort of get it and, we move forward. So.
Good. All right, so I'm going to tell a little bit about what we hope the future to be in the not too distant future. So, again, looking at that product lifecycle, what we'd like to see in that planning phase is, rather than big old upfront, yearly planning, that we do rolling planning along the way, that we do lots of small, cheap experiments. And if and only if one of those experiments is successful, only then do we double down with a big cross-functional, company-wide initiative. In terms of development, to Mark's earlier point, we want people to be developing in small batch sizes, and we want them to have a very fast, tight inner loop of build and test and debug iteration for individual developers. We want them to be doing daily merges and deploys, or even better, and things go all the way to site from that. And then we'd like to spend a lot more time focusing on decoupling our architecture so the teams are able to move more independently from each other. In terms of software delivery, what we want is a fully automated test and deployment pipeline for every one of the thousands of apps that we have at eBay. A goal is 1 hour commit to deploy, as the elite performers in the Accelerate metrics do. And then we'd like to do a lot more iteration in production by turning on and off feature flags. And then in terms of that iterate phase, the sort of post-launch phase, we want to have a lot more visibility, observability, and both observability of the system, but also of a customer behavior. So end-to-end monitoring there, tracking customer behavior in a privacy safe way, but just so that we understand what the customers are doing so we can improve it. Again, many small, cheap experiments that we iterate on and that we get rapid feedback on those results. Mark and I hope that this was really valuable to you all. Hopefully you can take some actionable takeaways from this, and we're now available for questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Hello, welcome. That was awesome, you two. I know we've talked to both of you about this in the past, and I'm so impressed hearing all this. I watched this last night, and I tweeted out right afterwards that it's like a run book on how to improve velocity inside of an engineering organization. So well done. Thank you for presenting. Randy, so the first thing you said is that you kind of instrumented the metrics from Accelerate, the DORA metrics, so that people could actually see what was going on. Could you talk? I've heard from the chat here sometimes that this is like the first time people have heard about DORA. Can you talk a bit how you put that into practice?
Yeah, sure. So again, there's a theme, like literally every talk in the track mentioned when we say DORA metrics, Accelerate metrics, it's the same thing. Accelerate is the name of the book. DORA is the name of the organization. DevOps Research and Assessment, I think, is the acronym. And the metrics are, as I mentioned, deployment frequency, lead time for change failure rate, and then mean time to recover. How do we measure it? Well, it turns out, fortunately, we already had all the detail for those measurements. That we were measuring those things kind of already, but not together in this form, if that makes any sense. And so when I arrived, my team showed me a pretty complicated derived metric that put all those together with exponential decay and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, that's too complicated. What if we just keep the four separate? So we have had a dashboard, that looks at a bunch of different things where we've been able to see aspects of development health, production health. We've had that for a long time. And then we just added these things very explicitly as these four.
Just for specifically, is it just Jira output? Is it just Git metric? Where are you getting the data? What's the source in real terms?
Sure. Let me see. Deployment frequency. So we have our deployment tooling, and so that tooling knows when it starts. And that tooling knows how many deployments we're doing, and it knows what team is doing it. So that the deployment frequency is relatively straightforward. The lead time for change involves, so we use GitHub. That involves, the start is the GitHub part and the end is the deployment part for the lead time. Does that make sense? So again, it's lead time commit to deploy. You can measure lots of things, but the Accelerate metric is specifically when the developer checks in her code, she's ready to go, net of whatever code review process, et cetera, testing, blah, 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 pipeline, all the way to the deployment.
Makes sense. Mark, you said I can't say enough about the importance of putting these metrics in place. It gets rid of the debate. You've been in engineering for a while. Why these four metrics? I mean, really, why?
Well, I think having something that there's research behind that correlates improvements in these metrics to improvements in your software delivery performance is so important, because especially an effort like this, it's a big effort, but we started, I think rightfully so, we started with 10% of our active applications. And so when we communicate progress to our team and leaders and executives, it's hard to see like the improvements. We feel them as engineers, but the non-engineering people are always asking, well, are we getting faster? How do you know we're getting faster? And it's a big investment, so we want to be able to show that there's a great return on that investment. And so having these metrics it just gets you out of the debate of, is it working? We have objective data and research to show yes, it's working. So I just, it's so important, because I've done this in other organizations, and without these kind of metrics, it's really sort of hard to prove, especially early on, that it's working. And I think you see a lot of times that people kind of lose interest or excitement about an effort if they don't see the results. So
yeah, it's science, right? It's kind of hard to refute science. So Randy, Tom asked a question here. He said he's having some of these exact same conversations as I'm sure you have at his organization, now 30 engineers, but people are freaking out about the term optimized for speed. So how did you really get buy-in? How did you really, and I want to talk about some more of this here in a minute, but how did you really get buy-in from like leadership?
Yeah. I mean, the honest answer is it's a combination of, this is just facts. I am trusted by my leadership. Mark is trusted by his leadership. That leadership trusts one another. So that helps because we come in with a little bit of like credibility that like we say things that are true. And also there's no substitute like for the actual research. Nicole Forsgren, who wrote the Accelerate book and did all the data science for years and years of the state of DevOps reports, like, again, it's science. And so just simply saying, you can trust us, we're going to do this, and here's why. Those same slides that we showed you all, like, we show exactly those slides literally to our executive team. And we say, here are the metrics that are industry standard, and here's why moving them matters. And to Tom's question about, do people get freaked out when you say optimize for speed? Sure they do, because they have this sense, and it's wrong by the science, but like it's intuitive. You'd think that there's this trade-off between speed and stability. If I go faster, I'm clearly reducing the quality. Turns out that's not true. And it is counterintuitive. So, part of it is like, trust us and you'll see it. And like, we saw it.
Randy, I want to come right back to that question, but before I do that, I want to ask Mark. So, Mark, as you start describing, Randy's got platform, he's the architect, you've got kind of the product features, you've got this vertical kind of horizontal relationship. The thing that comes to mind when you're showing that is Conway's Law. How is it that these things don't start running into each other? How is it that you're able to work together and not create systems based on two different communication systems?
Yeah, that's a great question because I've seen that happen before. I would say it starts with Randy and I. We met a year ago and we just hit it off. We think alike. We say the same things. We finish each other's sentences, and it's not. There's no effort to do that. We just think alike, and so immediately teams started seeing that and feeling like, wow, this is a highly collaborative effort. We're going to work together as a team to actually make this happen. And there is a natural, like this kind of alignment between sort of platform and more application oriented. There is a natural alignment for these things. Like my teams depend on all of the work that Randy's teams do. Like we need these tools and infrastructure to actually make this work. And so I think that people understand that. We also made an explicit effort to bring people together. We have a weekly Scrum of Scrum meeting that I mentioned in the talk that brings the two teams together, and we solve problems in that meeting together, and people leave that meeting and go work on these problems together. So I just, it really feels like this is more like one team than separate org structures that, end up in a Conway's Law situation.
Yeah, if I could add to that, this, open and honest, this is different than how it used to be. I mean, there was a tension between the product side of the organization and the platform and infrastructure side of the organization. And this is what we're doing is breaking it down. So I don't want to give people it hasn't always been like this, but we're explicitly making it like this. And again, part of it is this collaborative relationship where we share goals and we work together. But again, also, you can both, like, the goal of the company is for the product team to make the customer experience better. But what can the platform and infrastructure teams offer is like horizontal improvement. So again, as we mentioned, okay, we're going to be responsible for how are we going to make build times better? How are we going to make the CI and CD pipelines better? How are we going to make startup time better? How are we going to do capabilities like canary deployment and traffic mirroring? So like that naturally uses the horizontalness of my organization. And again, we used a bunch of people that piloted with a bunch of teams in Mark's organization, many of them, and said, what are your bottlenecks? Tell us. What are your bottlenecks? Tell us. What are your bottlenecks? Tell us. And almost immediately there was commonality among all of those. And like, okay, we'll put horizontal forces toward solving that, if that makes any sense. So it's like, it's using it together, not in conflict.
Yeah, just to add to that, like, I think that there were a lot of silent sufferers in in at least my organization in the past that they just lived with these problems. When I first started at eBay, I synced one piece of the code, one component of the code, and did a build myself because I just wanted to get used to the tools. And it took over an hour to do a build. And I started asking questions. I'm like, do you like live with this? Like, is this okay? Like, it was just crazy to me. And yeah, people just kind of just accepted it. And I think it was, they weren't talking, you know, across teams. And, you know, Randy and I just got in there and we just asked these questions like, this is not okay. We got to fix this. Who's responsible for this? And connected people and just sort of followed up and held people accountable for actually fixing some of these problems they've been living with for years.
Yeah. Mark, keep going on that, because someone asked a little bit earlier about, you know, how you identified these problems, and Randy said you ask them. I think he also talked about value stream mapping both here and in the previous talk. But talk a little bit more about that. How did you get this list? You listed 20 things that were issues. How did you really identify those?
Yeah, it's not rocket science. We literally asked the leaders of these teams what was slowing them down, because it varied from team to team. And that's part of the benefit of the program is it's not, you know, every team having exactly the same problems. And so as we work with individual teams, we find one problem that does apply to some other teams, not all. And then we work with another team and they have a problem that applies to some of the other teams. And so you end up with this toolbox, this velocity toolbox that we call it, that now everyone in the company gets to benefit from, you know, one team sort of highlighting, hey, I have this problem. Where you might have had another team that actually had the problem, but they just didn't do anything about it, didn't think there was a solution to it. So you literally ask the experts that are dealing with this every day, what is their problem? And then, you know, you obviously, Rand and I have our own experience of what's okay and what's really not okay. And again, here, there's a lot of people, I think, that had been living with these things and feeling like it wasn't a problem until we came in and said, this is a problem. We're not going to do this.
Yeah.
And I know we're close to moving over to the hangout with the speakers, which we will continue the conversation over there. But just to riff on that, so two things. Number one, it was so powerful to ask individual teams, hey, if I told you today you had to move to daily deployments with, you know, whatever, 1 day lead time or 2 day lead time, what are all the reasons why you can't do that? And we didn't ask that in an accusing way. We said, you know, tell us. Every team is like, what are you joking? Like, here's all the 20 reasons. And they'd never heard people go, great, thank you. we're already working on this one and this one and this one, and that's a new one and such. And then, you know, you develop this trust by like, we're actually knocking a bunch of those things down. And nobody asked them these questions before. So it's a motivator for the team to see when you say a thing is broken, like people will actually like jump on it and fix it. And my teams, there's a bunch of things where my teams were like, yep, we knew that. But there were a bunch of things where we're like, wow, never thought of that.
Yeah, I think Mark said in the chat, don't underestimate the developer experience of improving the build process, right? Absolutely. So we don't have time to ask the question that I want to about change failure rates. So we're going to go over to the Zoom room. But when we get to the Zoom room, Randy, cue this up. I want to know how you went to a 3x change failure rate improvement. You reduced it by 3x by going faster, because that certainly seems counterintuitive. So if you want to hear the answer to that, see us over in the Zoom room.
Yeah, we'll answer the other questions too.
And one or two other questions too.